Wherever you're struggling, there is a story that is playing out. It is the magic carpet that is making that struggle real. And when we talk about that you are the problem and the solution, this is a very concrete example of what I mean.
This is Becoming, the podcast for leaders to think differently with actionable tips in 30 minutes or less to claim your intuition, your influence, and your agency. And finally, get to the truth of what stands between you and who you are meant to become. Many of us believe that once we become that future self, then we will be happy, successful, and complete. This podcast exists to shine a light on the truth that the time is now and your future self can be who you become today. Let's dive in.
Hello and welcome back to episode 3 of Addiction to Awakening on the Becoming podcast. I am just feeling so grateful today, grateful for the opportunity to do what I love to do and grateful that I get to share what's really been my challenges as the change that I see you all can make. So just remember that, in your life, you've heard the quote, your mess is your message. I love the idea that your challenges are your change. Let's dive in. So as always, with this Addiction to Awakening series, I want to start each podcast with a perception shift. Remember, you are the problem, but you are also the solution. And when you're willing to put those glasses on as we start our time together, you're going to be more resourceful, more conscious, and more open. When you believe that the problems in your life are created by you on some level because they're yours, and you believe that you can solve them, that you can create a new way, you choose empowerment over the lie that you are powerless. So on episode 1 of this series, we dove into what it means to choose to be a victim, what it means to subscribe to victim consciousness. On episode 2, we dove into our addiction to problems and disorder. And today, my friends, on episode 3 of this series, we are going to dive into stories. Addiction number 3 is the stories we tell ourselves and the stories of our lives. So as a reminder, addiction is any behavior that we feel powerless to change, any behavior that is running and is running so powerfully that we don't believe we have the freedom. And by the way, these addictions that I'm bringing to you are unconscious. They are not conscious. And so it's even more powerful as they run our lives because most oftentimes we aren't even aware of them. When I got the inspiration to structure these teachings in this way, it was made very clear to me that they needed to be packaged in this way because we don't think of them in this way. We don't think of the stories that run our lives as addictions. But that's exactly what they are. So let's dive into how do these stories play out and where are they showing up in our lives? So when I talk about stories, what I want you to think about are the stories that are running your life or the stories that you tell yourself. And so a great way to dive into this topic today is really to look at your last meetup with a friend, your last interaction with that friend. Do you recall talking about anything that was challenging? Do you recall bonding over anything that was going wrong? This piggybacks what we talked about in the previous episode, right? Of focusing on the problems. We're so conditioned to bond with our loved ones and the closest to us about what's going wrong because that is the past conditioning. But when we are aware of something, it is our duty to change it. And that is why you're listening to this podcast, is because you believe that you are meant to become something great. You are meant to become more than your lineage. You are meant to become more than where your parents stopped and handed the baton to you. And these addictions are going to help you uncover those. So as we look at the stories of our lives, what's really interesting is if we start to look at themes in our lives, we can be sure that there's a story playing in the background. The story most often is why we can't do something. The story most often is a limitation in disguise. Limitations disguise themselves. Limitations disguise themselves as a story of why not. Limitations also disguise themselves as a story of struggle. Wherever you're struggling, there is a story that is playing out. It is the magic carpet that is making that struggle real. And when we talk about that you are the problem and the solution, this is a very concrete example of what I mean. If you can see that a struggle that's going on in your life, and if you don't have a current struggle, think of a past one. If you reflect on that, I know you will be able to see that on some level you were telling a story about that struggle. When I say you are the problem and you're the solution, the part that I want you to take ownership is you are the problem in the way that you are fueling that story by telling it. You are keeping it alive by giving it legs. Your language is the legs, okay? And so I want you to think about that. Now, when I talk about you are the solution, we get to stop telling the story. We get to speak life into our dreams. We get to talk about inspiring thoughts. I was listening to a podcast. It was the Ed Milet show, and he had mentioned something to the effect of speaking more about our imagination and vision versus memory and history. And I loved that for this topic around stories, because how unconscious is it to talk about history? Because history can be the day before, right? If you're going home to your family and it's 5, 6 o'clock, you're starting dinner, your history is the day that just happened. How easy is it to talk unconsciously about what didn't work? How easy is it to talk unconsciously about what you didn't like? That is giving life to our stories. And are your stories supporting who you want to become? That is the question. That is the end all be all, right? Are we speaking about who we want to become? Or are we speaking of where we went wrong? Are we speaking to people that connect over our problems? Like we talked about last episode, where is your addiction? Because that addiction is likely in a story. So I want to talk about stories as it relates to different parts of our lives, because a lot of times we don't see where we're telling a story when it comes to when we see reality is fixed. And this is really dangerous, because if we see reality as fixed, meaning you're stuck in something, or even a health issue. This is a big one, because a lot of people, if there is a health issue, we've been conditioned that that's fixed. This happened to me, victim. This is a problem, problems and disorder. And we tell the story, even if you're in pursuit of fixing the health challenge, of how it's disempowering you. When you operate by the philosophy that you are the problem and the solution, please understand that that is a different level of ownership that you're saying you want to take for your life. And if you're listening to this podcast, you're ready for it. You would not be here if you weren't ready to operate at a higher level of ownership. That is leading yourself at a higher level. But as it relates to health, many times we don't see the unconscious story that plays in the background. And let me give you an example. So if I am really tired very often, if I speak about how tired I am, how exhausted I am, how hard things are, that can turn into a story that I am depleted. The body listens to our instructions. So if we're constantly telling this story that we have a hard time with something or we're struggling in some way, the body responds to our instruction. So as I explain stories as this addiction, I want you to take it into every area of your life. What story are you telling about your finances? What story are you telling about your capability to lead? What story are you telling about your ability to lift weights or work out or make your workouts? What story are you telling about your worthiness to be a part of that mastermind you want to join? What story are you telling yourself about the imposter syndrome you feel? And that's why you're not starting the venture you've been inspired to launch. What story are you telling yourself about your health? What story are you telling yourself about your weight? What story are you telling yourself about how much you can lift, how strong you are, right? You see how so quickly our life is built on stories. How scary is it in a way, right? Of the fact that all these stories are running without our intentionality, without our intention that they are talking about the life we want to have. So really commit after this episode to look at your life and look at the stories that are creating your life, because you are the artiste and this life is your masterpiece and stories are the paint. Are you ready to step into your power as a conscious leader? Are you seeking a community of extraordinary, like-minded women who are making a difference in their internal and external world? Well, look no further. We'd love to introduce to you Legendary Leaders Advisory, a premier women-led and women-owned leadership community that's focused on success, not just externally, but in the internal world as well. We are the first and only leadership community that contributes a portion of its membership fees to fund and inspire the next generation of leaders through both scholarship and mentorship opportunities. And the best part, it's led by its own members. If you're looking for a community with a different conversation that addresses the necessary connection between internal and external results, look no further. Click the link in the show notes to learn more about Legendary Leaders Advisory, and one of our Truth Teacher consultants will reach out to you to discuss the opportunity further. Now, one thing that obviously fuels our stories is our language. I once had a client that almost in every sentence, she would say how hard something was. What was interesting about this client is that she herself was rigid. She herself had a hardened exterior, and people were relating to that hardened exterior. So she didn't experience a lot of connection, deep relationships. I was able to show her the story she was telling herself was very much around how hard things were. And that almost in every sentence, I heard her say how hard things were. When she started to uproot her language and stopped talking about how hard life was, life started becoming different. There's a beautiful quote by Florence Shinn, and that quote is, "Our word is our wand." Our word fuels our stories. We are addicted to speaking in unconscious ways that are disempowering. We're addicted to speaking in ways that, frankly, it's all on default. It's all running unconsciously. If you are willing to look at your language and see that that's fueling your stories, the game changes so quickly and so beautifully, because the results that you start to realize in your life, you can say, oh my gosh, I see how this connects to the fact that I caught myself. I was talking about how hard it was all the time. I caught myself that it was hard. I changed my language. I told a new story that things flow and come easily. And I am realizing that by X number of new clients signing up for my programs and services. Life responds to you so quickly. That is the powerful creator that you are. That is what is up for you to become if you take a look at your stories and your language. Because, my friends, this is such a huge addiction that we are unaware of. We are unaware of how powerful we are when we speak. That quote from Florence Shin is something that I anchor in so much, because our word is our wand, meaning that we are able to create such magic, right? If you think of a magic wand and think of your language in that way, if you just choose to stop being unconscious with the words you use and start to craft your language in an intentional way, that acts as the wand to create the magic in your lives so that you can start becoming who you are meant to be. Our addiction to stories and language that doesn't support what we want, it's so deep in our unconscious, we don't even catch it. We don't even realize it, right? When I talk about the client that I referenced, she was so unconscious to it. I had to bring it up several times because it was just running. We are products of our environment. We are products of how we were raised. And being intentional with language and what you're talking about internally to yourself and those around you, to the market, to your clients, if you're willing to take a hard look at this, that addiction can stop. And you can start to create the space to create more intentionally with your words and your stories. So here's a few tips for you to take away to start powerfully and intentionally using your language and creating stories. Number one, make a list of why you can't do something in your life. So we all have those things, right, where we've wanted to do something and there's a reason why we haven't. Make a list, do a brain dump. What are those things that you've been postponing, putting off for whatever reason? It could be large or small. Make a list. And then in the next column, make a list of why you can. And see how much the story perpetuates through those examples you list. Number two, how can you see your language is creating every scenario in your life? I'll give you a quick example here. When I think about my beautiful daughter that I just welcomed into the world, when I think about my experience with having her and her sleep and how easily she sleeps and what a great baby she is, my language and story about that experience absolutely created the bed we lay in, very comfortably, by the way, because we're getting sleep, because I decided to be intentional about the story I was going to tell, about the experience I wanted to have, and it's realizing itself. So that's a quick example of your language and how it creates the actual bed you lay in my case. But how can you see your language and story about a topic is creating your experience? And the third thing, what stories are you ready to change in your life? These stories can be easily tracked back to the areas of your life that you are dissatisfied with. If there is an area in your life you're dissatisfied with, there is a story playing out, and it is high time for you to extract it and create it consciously. Your becoming relies on it. Your becoming of who you're meant to be relies on your willingness to see the unconscious addictions so that you can wake up to the truth and start to experience freedom, no matter how small or large, so you can start creating the life you are meant to have. I'll see you next week.
Are you experiencing change and breakthroughs as you listen to Becoming? If so, show us some love and hit the subscribe button, leave a review, and share an episode. I love bringing this content to you each week, and together, listener by listener, we can wake up the world. See you next week.